Genetics Through Evolution by Leonel Espinosa, Davelyn White Johnson, and Efren Galvan. How do environmental factors influence genetic frequencies in a population over multiple generations? Populations: a group of organisms of one species that interbreed and live in the same place at the same time. For example, a deer population.
Mendel and Darwin searched in time. The scientific study of heredity, segregation, and assortment laws defined to know about traits in biology. These traits or genes are dominant recessive. Sexual reproduction is also reproductive organelles are visibly expressed. Generations by the populace construe no fuss. Meiosis of the chromosomes make selection adaptations or genetic variation. Generations by the populace construe no fuss. Meiosis of the chromosomes and genes I rule, I rule, I rule. We call that heredity. The Punnett square declares predictions. The possibilities of combinations from light to massive. The sexual modes of reproduction develops internal, external fertilization. So know the phenotypes and know the homozygous, know about genotypes like human heterozygous haplodiploid, incomplete codominance, evolution about family, pedigree, mimicry, diversity. What the gene predict for us is a pattern of inheritance. Evolution about family, pedigree, mimicry, diversity, and genes I rule, I rule, I rule. We call that heredity.
Common misconceptions. At the elementary level, students believe that plants are not alive. Another misconception is that they believe that plants need food to eat in order to grow. At the middle school level, they believe that natural selection produces perfection. And at the high school level, they believe that natural selection is random.
What are the causes of genetic variation? Some individual variation can be visibly observed. This enables us to be identified in a crowded room. The variation that we see, however, is the result of molecular biology and is defined as genetic variation.
There are three primary sources of genetic variation in a population. Number one, mutations, that is, changes in the DNA. Number two, gene flow, any movement of genes from one population to another. Three, sexual reproduction, can introduce new gene combinations into a population.
Mutations are classified as somatic mutation, which is a mutation occurring in cells that occur in non-reproductive cells and won't be passed down to offspring. Germline mutations happen in the reproductive cells and are passed down to offspring. Mutations are ultimate source of increased variations. Mutation rates in animals and plants average about 1 in every 100,000 genes per generation.
Gene flow, also known as migration, is the movement of genes from one population to another. This is an event such as pollen being blown to a new destination or people moving to new cities. In our illustration, the brown beetle moving from the brown beetle group to reproduce with a green beetle, where a brown beetle previously did not exist. Then gene flow is a very important source of genetic variation.
Sexual reproduction is a process that creates a new organism by combining the genetic material of two organisms. Through sexual reproduction, some genetic shifting occurs. Dominant and recessive genes play an important part here, ultimately creating new combinations of genes that each individual inherits for our individual variation.
Increased genetic variation is descent of genetic information with many modifications. These changes occur as defined through migration, mutation, and sexual reproduction.
How do environmental factors influence genetic frequencies in a population over multiple generations?
Environmental factors are internal and external. Internal environment includes factors such as hormones and metabolism, gender and genetic mutation. An example of a gender-specific internal environment is the red-green color blindness trait. This factor seems to mostly affect males.
External environmental factors. These include drugs, radiation, chemicals, temperature, light, and natural selection. In the example, differential reproduction illustrates that not all organisms get to reproduce. Thus, the surviving organisms would genetically reproduce their traits. Adaptive evolution determines that there is a consistent favoring of some alleles over others and improves a match between the organisms and their environment, thus multiplying the frequency of the individual carrying the allele with the increased fitness. We measure evolution as a change in the prevalence of certain heritable traits in a population over a span of generations.